looking at this, which is, again, a very real world problem that we could actually tackle, that the first thing you have to do is in how to subclone this protease. And this is a part of DNA that is in a large section of DNA, I should say RNA, in the actual virus. And so I want to, again, I'm going to bring this up over here and just say, if we could picture this, one of the open reading frames, we talked about open reading frames in the viral genome. One of them is massive. It goes and goes and goes and goes. And just a small section of this is actually this protease, this main protease. It does not have, this is not starting with an ATG, because the actual open reading frame here starts with an ATG, and then there's the stop. But this encompasses numerous proteins, or I should say that are going to be proteins. Once this protease is snipped out, then what ends up happening is, like I said, the whole thing is translated into this gigantic protein and then snipped out into its components, which fold and become the parts of the virus that assemble. And so this protease itself, the interesting thing about this is a lot of people have been kind of looking for the same things that we have seen in other open reading frames, which is an ATG in that, and this one doesn't have it. And so if you look, this is right here, the sequence, and this took a long time for me to end up getting, but this is the sequence right here of the DNA that we care about, that this is what we actually want to subclone out. But when we look at this right here, this is the first codon, which is AGT. So the first codon is AGT, and that encodes for an S. And so you can see that's what this is right here. And then the last one here, you can see, is this CAA, right? And that's what's going to encode the last one, which is a glutamine. There is no stop codon here. So there, in other words, when you kind of think of this in the grand scheme of a very, very long open reading frame, whereas you would normally have a reading frame where you have an ATG at the beginning and you have some sort of stop codon, whether it be UAG or UAA, this doesn't have that, because it reads right through as if it's part of this protein, this very large polyprotein, sorry. And so that's a little bit different. Now that's fine, because we're going to just take this out. We're going to provide it with our own ATG. We're going to provide it, the plasmid that we're going to put this in, PET28, is going to provide it with everything we need. So really this is a little simpler once we can kind of visualize that. This is actually simple in that really all we want to do is we want to start it here and we want to end it here. Now, when they show these, the genes like this is the coding strand. They always show the coding strand. And what that means is you're really looking at the codons themselves. And always, when we write from left to right, this means it's 5' to 3'. So again, looking at this, the DNA that we're going to clone out is this. And this is the coding strand, and it will end with CAA. So this is the DNA that we're going to have. Now, we're going to end up subcloning both strands. And so if we look at the other strand of this, we are actually going to, the other strand is going to be TCA, all right? And then this one here would be TTG. So whenever we think of what an actual gene is, I realize we kind of think in one strand. Now the gene, in many cases, is what we're thinking, right? When you think, well, what is the gene? This is the template strand is the one here. And then this is what we typically call the coding strand, and it's because that's the code that we're looking at, 5' to 3'. That's the code we're looking at for the actual codons and then therefore the amino acid sequence. So that's the gene itself. Now we're going to put stuff on the ends of these, all right? So we're going to end up putting some stuff here to subclone this out. But I'm trying to get you guys to kind of visualize what we're doing here, okay? So this is the gene. We really do need to know this, okay? So as I go through this, I can tell you right now, I don't really need to know any of these sequence. I am going to have to know 20 to 25 here and 20 to 25 nucleotides here, because we're going to include that in our PCR primer. Now I'm going to kind of go ahead here and say, we are going to put it, what we wanted is, we had said we were going to end up having the ending protein that we really want is going to have the his tag. This was in the actual assignment. We want the T7 tag, and then we want that protease. And that's obviously going to be a bigger chunk of the DNA. And then we want it to end. All right, so that's what we want in an act. So I'm thinking of this kind of linearly as the protein itself. This is how it's going to end up playing out. In the actual sequence itself, when we look down here in the plasmid, we are actually the T7 promoter. We start transcription. There's that lac operator. We had IPTG. It takes the repressor off this. We get transcription. But remember, this doesn't start. This is the transcript messenger RNA that will form off of this. But where is this going to actually start translation? Well, here's the ribosome binding site, and there's the first ATG. And so if we let this stay, in other words, don't mess with this part, this is just going to be like what we had with our ADC7, the mutant, in that we have, it starts here. So here's residue 1 right there. There's residue 1 that's going to end up being translated. And so this is going to go through and give us a his tag and a T7 tag. Now, because we specified that we want these, then we're going to clone somewhere in here. So your job at some point is to take a look at these and say, I need to look at these restriction enzymes, and would any of these work? Okay, now I don't want it to let it get down. You can notice that there's a stop codon that we could use here, but we don't want that. That is extraneous sequence and a his tag that I don't want. So I don't want any of this. And so I'm going to say that the better way to do this would be to put a stop codon at the end of this. And so we can actually engineer in a stop. So it will truly stop at the C terminus and be done. And so this is how we're going to do it. Now, notice, we're really looking for is we clearly have to have it from left to right. So if we're going to clone here, we have a directionality here. This is going to run in this direction. So if this is going to be translating, here's all our amino acids that are going to be at the N terminus. And then we want it to start somewhere in here, but the protease itself, clearly we have to have, something on the left is going to be the left part, or the 5' of the gene itself. So we're going to want restriction enzyme 1 to be over here. Restriction enzyme 2 that we're going to include is going to be over here. Now, if you're saying, I don't know what the hell you're talking about as far as this, I just want to refer you guys to this stuff right here. It's worth looking through because, and I'm not going to go through all this right now, but it's worth looking through that you're going to end up making a gene here that we're going to PCR this out, and we're going to do it in such a way that we're going to be able to cut it with those two enzymes and make an insert that's going to be matching up then with the insert, the multiple cloning site. When we cut that as well, it's going to match up puzzle piece to puzzle piece to be able to click right in and ligate right in. The hard part is really coming up with the primers that it's going to allow this to happen. So what I wanted to do is to kind of go back and, and actually what I would say is, sorry. There we go. Is to go forward here and just say, remembering this right here, which states that you cannot have one of these restriction sites, A or B, actually cut in the middle here. So job one, in all honesty, is if we're going to come now back to this restriction site, these maps here, is job one, I would say, is to go through and do a quick restriction enzyme analysis. You don't even need a program for this. You can just Google restriction enzyme analysis. There's all kinds of little sites. And cut and paste. And I don't need it to be PET28 because PET28 tells me, it already gives me this multiple cloning site of these. These are restriction enzyme sites that are unique to just that part. So it doesn't cut anywhere else in the plasmid. But I would like to know of what about that protease. And so you just cut and paste. You go up in Word, and you can, which would be helpful. I'm starting to think I might have just applied that PDF. So I'll put the Word version of this document in there so that you can cut and paste that sequence out, the DNA sequence. And then look at, do any of the normal restriction enzymes cut in that sequence? If they cut anywhere in that sequence, right, then you can't use them. And so I'm going to tell you right now that there's a few of them over here. As you look over here, there's at least one or two that will cut in the protease, and so you can't use it. Anyone that doesn't, though, now you can really start to pick. Now, I can actually pick this and say, okay, fine. Let's say that I'm just going to choose, I don't know, we could choose EcoR1 or BAMH1 or whatever. And you can choose that. And actually, I want to come back and I want to be able to just not have that line there. But you can actually come back and use, say, the BAMH1 and the 5' or whatever, EcoR1, whatever. The reason that I always kind of go left from right is that the closest, you're going to clone it in the closest, you're going to have all this sequence that's going to be in. If you're closer here, it's less amino acids you're going to end up including before your protease. The same goes for, you could do a BAM Eco clone or BAM Sac or BAM Cell, doesn't matter. But if you put a stop code on right there, then you don't have all this other extraneous sequence. I kind of like having as little as possible. So putting the protease in there, you can do that. Now, there are multiple ways, but let's just assume, like I said, let's just assume you do this analysis, and I'm not going to list them, but let's say that of this that you have spotted, so you know your sequence on that top, and let's say, okay, fine, you are going to, and I'm going to go like this, and I know then that my complementary sequence is there. This is my gene that I want. So for an actual primer, I'm going to actually have, I'm going to include that restriction enzyme. And so what I need is something that will anneal this part, okay, to 20 to 25 nucleotides. And this is going to look exactly like the coding strand. So I'm annealing it to the red strand there, the bottom one. But it's going to look exactly like, so it is the exact same sequence of what you see. So clearly it would start with that, I think it was an AGT, it would start with that. So, and so there's your guidance there. But then we're going to end up putting 6 nucleotides here. That's going to be your restriction enzyme 1. And then 3 nucleotides, that's going to be, I think I said GCC. Well, guess what? That's it. I mean, that is your primer. That's your first primer, right? So that is going to go off and really reproduce the top strand. It's going to copy the bottom strand, but it's going to go and essentially become a new coding strand. But it is going to include this restriction enzyme 1. So when we're done, it's going to have, right, this entire thing is going to be the top coding strand, right? And this will be the protease sequence that you've seen in your report. And then we'll have our 3 and then our 6 nucleotides there, okay? The bottom strand is a little different in that what we're going to do is, again, we're going to copy that top one now. So it's going to look similar to this, the top, but it's going to look like the bottom strand. And it's going to have 20 to 25 here. That it's going to essentially mimic the bottom strand, remembering that the 5' is this end. And this is the end of that primer. And so what we're going to end up getting is, right, a bottom strand as well. And in this case, what we're going to end up having to add is that we are going to end up having three nucleotides here, 6 and a 3. This is going to be a stop codon, restriction enzyme 2, and then the GCC. Okay? So I realize that is, sorry about that. But what that means is it is going to be, and then obviously when that is a new strand, then we're going to have this down here. So both of these are going to have that 3 nucleotides, 6, 3. All right. And so this top will be, whoops, sorry. So what did we have to make? Okay, in this, what did we have to make? What we had to make in all of this is, I gotta change my, there we go. Okay, so in this, what is the actual sequence that we made? Okay, and what I'm going to do is say this is my top strand. That was my primer 1. Okay, that was my coding strand. It went 5' to 3', and this is what I'm actually making. This is the 3 and the 6, and then the 20 to 25 nucleotides here. Okay, so that is what I'm going to make here. On the bottom one, what is this one going to be? Okay. There we go. I'm going to give it this. So this is going to be my primer, and it's going to mimic that bottom strand, but this is what I'm going to order up here. Okay? And what that's going to provide you with then is that what you end up getting is a chunk of DNA, but then once we cut this, so once we actually decide we're going to end up cutting this, what we have then is it's going to cut somewhere in here, here, somewhere in here, and I will get my sticky ends from my 2 restriction enzyme sites there. By doing this, then that's when I get this, and I don't know, depending on what your sequence is, it could look like this, whatever, but this is then what we're going to get after cutting it. But we had to make sure to design those restriction enzyme sites in there in order to get this. And then we can clone that into the PET28. So the main thing is you have to have, from looking back over here now, I realize it's kind of messy, but over here you have to have something that goes, in this case, 5' to 3'. So you have to have something like a BAM or ECO or anything on the left side going to the right. Now, I just want you to know, I didn't put what that stop codon would be in here, but what you want to make sure it is whatever this sequence is on the bottom here, you want to make sure that it codes, because remember, this is the coding strand, that it's going to end up coding for a U, a G, or a U, a A in that position. And if so, then you have a stop codon and you're done. So you have now given it a stop codon. You don't need a start codon. It's already translating at this point in that plasmid, so you're all good to go. The one thing you do want to make sure is just that you actually have this in frame. And so what that means is, looking at this, I kind of said this in class, but it's hard to see. If you look at this, BAM-H1 and EcoR1 in this plasmid are what we call in frame. And what I mean by that is that you can see the 6 nucleotides are in frame with actual amino acids, so they're codons. So if you were to code anything for in BAM-H1 and that was your restriction site, you would just start right after this, the same way, by the way, with EcoR1, that you would just start going back to here now, the sequence right here would start in, and it would be in frame. So if you were to do a BAM-H1, you would be able to simply just do and there you go, and you would start. So here's my start, here's my 3, there's my 6, and there's my covey starting. So that would be what a top strand could be, okay? If I didn't have it in frame, then you may have to just insert, okay, if it were out of frame. And let's say that your 6 nucleotides here ended up being where it was going to make your covey nuclease be out of frame, then what you can do is just simply insert nucleotides. You'll never need more than 1 or 2. And really what you want to make sure is, as you go through, whatever the frame is, you just want to, I just basically draw 3 around these, like this is BAM-H1, this was the frame from the plasmid, and I go, yep, then that's good. I just want to make sure AGT is in frame. If AGT is in frame, then I'm good to go, and I don't have to worry about the other end because I'm going to put a stop code on it. So it doesn't even matter. So essentially what we want then is, looking at this, hopefully, is you want to clone this out, subclone this, but you want to be able to put on your primers restriction enzyme sites that will allow it to insert somewhere into here, preferably with a stop codon on this end. If you can make primers that would do that, again, where are your primers to? Remember, the majority of your primer, you're not subcloning anything out of this. You're going into this. You are going to cut this plasmid, BAM-H1, say BAM-H1 Hindi3. I'm making this up but BAM-H1 Hindi3, you're going to cut this part out. It's going to leave sticky ends, a Hindi3 sticky end and a BAM-H1 sticky end, which you're going to then clone in your gene, right? You're going to clone your gene in, that will have that BAM and we'll say Hindi3. I don't know if that's the answer. But in any case, that's what you're going to want to do. And so this is the whole part of it, is just really thinking, what would the top strand be? What would the bottom strand be? And that's what I'm going to do my PCRing with. And once I get my PCR out, it's going to provide me with something like this, which will fit right into a cut version of this. So this is cut with 1 and 2, this is cut with 1 and 2, this slots right in, we're all good to go. If it reads through in frame and it keeps going through 3 through 3 and immediately goes into the frame of the protease, then you are golden.